Hi my friends, we are back to our shapes. We have done the circle, the cube, ellipse, egg shape, played with rectangular shapes, and we are heading into our triangle shape. And I have my regular tools with me: charcoal, vine charcoal, compressed charcoal, and an eraser, and my little handy dandy China marker that I like to use. So we're moving into the triangle shape. And again, we always start with, I like to start you guys off with just the basic shape itself. So a triangle shape, and it can be a variety of triangular shapes. Let's see, it can be something with a 90-degree angle. And all these triangles have really fancy names, but you decide what kind of triangle you're playing with. And then this guy, just like the cube, starts to turn. When it becomes three-dimensional, it will have planes. So we can think of it in a couple of different ways. Maybe the triangular plane is like that and it becomes a pyramid. Maybe you start to see it in different angles. You know, maybe if you see something sort of moving in space, like so. So these triangular shapes, depending on how we're looking at them in space, they would start to develop different planes. Let's see, I'm going to pretend I can see through this triangle. Triangular, just transparent triangle shape, we can see through it. The other version of the triangle that we like to play with in our art is the cone shape. And that incorporates the ellipse and a triangle together. Okay, so cone shape sort of starts like a triangle, but then it has this ellipse or sort of side circular element to it. And all of these shapes, you can play with that sense of light, having a lightest plane, a mid-tone value, and a dark value, depending on where the light is coming from. If we think the light's coming from this way, maybe the space would be dark. The object would have a sense of light on it. And then it would move away from the light. Maybe this would be dark. It's a floating cone shape. So there's really no wrong way. You can see some of the eraser marks from underneath are starting to come through. So let's talk about this triangular shape. Now that we have the circle shape, the ellipse, all of these different shapes, these basic principal shapes are the building blocks of art. Let's now take that into our actual composition, how we break up this page. These are the first 4 lines in our composition. In any drawing or painting, these are the first 4 lines, the edge of the page here. So now what we can do, let's work a little backwards now. What happens if we have a circular composition? Let's think about that. We can bring the circle into this shape, into this rectangular shape, into our composition. I'm going all around the edge here. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I would have a circle specifically. Maybe I arrange the elements that I'm using, whatever marks, maybe they're just marks or little dabs or dots or something. Maybe I have a swooping thing happening over here. Maybe this would be dark. But I overall have a circular shape, circular composition. However, I'm sort of arranging the elements. Maybe I have a ellipse over here, or an egg shape happening in the composition. So you can see that the whole thing is arranged. And again, it can be little elements arranged in a circular composition, or organized in a circular way. See how they're arranged in a circular way. All right, so now let's move away from our circle and move into now our cube or rectangular shape. So our picture plane is already in a rectangular shape. So in that composition, maybe we can create sort of rectangles or break up this overall picture plane in a rectangular or square-like manner. Sort of bring this down. I can bring this element in. Or maybe I take this and I drop it down. Took this, just thinking, what if I drop this angle, that line down? That would create this now sort of square shape in this. This is when we start getting into that golden rectangle that we talk about. There's this other compositional idea that if you take this angle here, this square shape, let's see if I take a brush, or if I take a piece of paper here, and I line this up along here, this shape here. Let's see how I did. Oh, I did pretty good for the square. And then if I make this square here again, and overlap, supposedly in here, if you place something along this line, it creates an interesting sort of dynamic, an interesting composition if you lay something along this line, where you've taken the edge of the page, laid it down, and created a square within the rectangle, using the dimension of the rectangle. Then you can even take this further. What if I now break this down? I end up making this more of a cube-like shape. You can see I'm just playing in this picture with the shapes that we've been talking about, exploring how they move and how they're arranged. And then now into this rectangular shape. So again, none of this is really permanent at this point, just playing, thinking out loud. It actually creates an interesting background. Maybe I'll take my eraser now, and what if I start dividing this picture plane up in a triangular way? So I start dividing the whole, I'm not just talking about a triangle inside of the picture plane. This is a triangle within the picture plane, these four lines. I'm talking about now, what happens if we start dividing this format, this picture, in a triangular way? We can divide it like that, start creating triangles here, maybe another triangle here. For fun, maybe I can bring that now, create this triangular shape, these triangular shapes. Again, what if I divide the picture plane like this? You can see I'm now using the triangle as a device to cut up this picture plane, to start talking about how we divide this space. And think about that. When you cut up this picture, when you start laying stuff down, you're cutting it up into smaller pieces. You want to do that in a dynamic way, whether you're drawing roses or a field or a face. You want to cut this picture plane up in an interesting way. This is not just a place to catch your hand. This is an actual mathematical figure that can be divided. Look at, if I divide it like this, we've made it sort of symmetrical, not so interesting. Then if I start thinking about maybe dividing it like this, maybe that's a little bit more interesting. See, small versus large. There's variety in how we're dividing the space. So let's keep this line. Then what happens if we start talking about how we divide it vertically? If I divide it right in the middle, not so interesting. I can just talk about dividing it maybe here. This is sort of interesting. And maybe this is a horizon line, and this is a tree that we're talking about in the picture. Right, so even though there's these weird sort of organic shapes, we're still, this center is where, how we're dividing this picture plane. If this is where I put my horizon line, this is how I'm dividing the picture plane. If I put my horizon line here, not as interesting, right? Maybe I can play with it and put it in here. So there's always room to adjust and play with how we divide this picture plane and these basic shapes that we've been talking about. Not only are they the building blocks to create and draw anything, but they're also the building blocks in how we divide our compositions, how we make our spaces more dynamic, more interesting. All right, so we have this background now of some marks and gestures and lines. So in speaking of our triangular notion, I'm gonna bring in a cone-like shape. Big, nice cone-like shape. I think I want it to take over like this. It's kind of interesting. And I'll bring that cone, that bottom of that cone in here. And let's see, we've been doing a lot of light coming from this direction. So what happens if there's light coming from this direction? I'm sort of thinking about the light coming from this direction. So this side would be light. Maybe over here would be light, and over here would be darker. This side would be darker. And you can see now I'm using the side of this tool. If you haven't already started to play with the sides of your charcoal, start to do that. I'm also using my tool as if I'm moving around this shape. Let's fill some of that. And again, I'm going to go back in and pretend that this light is coming from this direction. I'm going to lighten it up as though it hits that curve right there. And it probably gets a little darker as it moves away. And then darkest over here. Remember that light, it's coming over here. It's probably bouncing off of something and hitting back over here. So maybe over here would be light. And maybe there might be a reflected light on this side of this piece. Maybe over here this is getting some light, but as it moves away from the light it gets darker. And then maybe play with another triangular shape. Overlap. Maybe this one is more of a pyramid. Bring this up here. And I want this one to be, yes, like that. You can see how that starts to open up the space when we start talking a little bit more about light and planes. So if this is light here, coming through here, this would be light here. Maybe this side's away from the light and it would be dark. And I'm doing this in an abstract way. If this really was in front of this object, you probably wouldn't see any of this. And you can do that if you'd like. Maybe you want to go in and decide that you don't see any of this on here. It's good to kind of be free and open with your drawing, being willing to adjust and change, not feel like anything that you put down is stuck or permanent. It's always willing to change. That's why I show you these examples where I draw over things and overlap things and push things away. So you can see that the medium of drawing really is about adjusting and molding and sort of searching. And you can go back and fill in or do anything. If any of the other shapes, if you feel compelled to add them in, go ahead. And again, it doesn't all have to be three-dimensional. Maybe I add some more two-dimensional triangles into this abstract drawing just for fun, just to see what would happen, and I can break the rules regarding the light and shadows. But it's good to know some of the tools of light and shadow so you can manipulate these picture planes or these compositions in a more interesting way rather than just a flat way. Even abstraction can be play with light and shadow. And you can get creative about the shapes that you make, how you incorporate them. Maybe you add some interesting lines. Maybe your lines disappear and reappear behind things just for the fun of it. So there's no wrong way. Again, you can go back and decide to play with the light and the darks any way you want. You can imagine that there's a light source, or maybe there's no light source, depending on your aesthetic. Let's see, I'm going to go in and just add some more darks here, just to see if I can make this a little bit more interesting. This is kind of cool. Or maybe I might go in and just add some marks that make me happy or somehow describe something else that I'm either looking at or have looked at or something I'm feeling. It's been a cloudy day today. I've seen all these clouds in the sky, so that's coming through from my imagination. All right, so that's kind of interesting. Sort of like the way this is feeling overall. Again, like I said, you don't have to follow I say there's no rules, just tools. You don't have to employ all the tools, and you can change it up to make it your own. Feel free to incorporate any of the other shapes, any other marks that you want to add. See if you can vary the line quality. Sort of try to make this thicker, softer. This is thinner. And I'd love to have a white line in here, so I'm going to just erase through that just to incorporate some different kinds of lines. And that to be a little stronger in there. All right, so this is starting to finish up and be its own thing with its own rules and its own world. And it incorporates now this triangle shape or the cone shape. All right, see you soon.